Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. This week has seen a flurry of regulatory developments, both at the EU and national level. Today's episode focuses on France, and changes to President Macron's new government, as well as a belated look at his election victory. What does a new cabinet mean for France's energy transition and the expansion of renewables? As is fairly well known, France has been plagued by issues at its nuclear fleet, changing from being an exporter of power to a net importer. So are the plans for up to 14 new reactors realistic or feasible? So joining me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss France's energy strategy is Emeric de Vigan of Core E. So let's start by looking at the new government, especially the new Prime Minister. What does this mean for energy strategy in France, Emeric?
Well, let's be clear, we only have a new Prime Minister. As of today, we don't really have a new government, so it's pretty difficult to estimate what this really means. Generally speaking, I think this Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, is quite likely to continue the renewables expansion in France, or unlikely to stop it, put it that way. Regarding the new nuclear, it's a little bit less clear. I think it will depend on who is the actual ministry in charge of it. And also the big question is who will be the next CEO of EDF.
Okay, so we need to have those details really before we can have a closer dig deep into the issues there. But I've heard that Elisabeth Borne, that she's in charge of sort of green planning. What does this really mean?
Well, green planning means the political strategy to push for more renewables or to decarbonate the economy. I'm not expecting any major change compared to what we've seen in the last few years, 5 to 10 years. I think we're going to see a strong push for more solar generation with potential acceleration, actually. They want to make sure that it gets easier than before to actually get the permits to build the new solar farms. I'm not expecting any strong shock from a renewable point of view.
There are elections coming up in June, Emeric. What can we expect here? I know it's mainly, there's talking that, we could see an increased polarization of the country, but would there be any sort of energy impacts here?
This is very political question. As you said, we've seen that some political leaders are strongly against nuclear generation, whereas most of the others are in favor of continuation of the development of nuclear fleets, or at least the renewal of the renewable fleets. Said differently, they think most of people think we do need some nuclear generation if we want to decarbonate the economy. So there's really two different positions there. One, it's led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is strongly against nuclear generation in his public positions. All the others seems to be in favor of it.
And he has quite strong support in France. I mean, he came third in the presidential election. So, I mean, what could the potential, if he were to, provide or get a strong share of the vote, could that add pressure on the nuclear plants?
I don't think so, because the way the elections in June do work, I mean, he's quite unlikely to get a majority, and he's actually quite unlikely to get a very large amount of deputies in the parliament. So he will have, his voice will be listened at, but I don't think he will really be in a position to actually decide the energy policy of the country.
It's clear that there could be a more divided country, but I'm just thinking potentially Macron's position could be weakened. Yeah.
Yes, it could be weakened, but I don't see Jean-Luc Mélenchon having the majority in the parliament. I don't see any other party having the majority in the parliament. So it's also quite unlikely to be. He is also quite unlikely to be in a very, very weak position. In fact,
Jean-Luc Mélenchon, that is.
Emmanuel Macron. I think he should be in a position to take decisions, at least from an energy point of view.
So, I mean, what does this then mean, for example, for the very ambitious plans to build 6 new EPRs, or European pressurized reactors, and potentially with an option of up to 8 more? Do you think what's your view on this target?
I think so far, I just see it as a public announcement that was actually done before the presidential election, and everything still has to be done. The financing is not clear. The people who would be in charge of this project are unknown yet. So to me, there's nothing clearly ready to achieve this plan yet. So I think before the country is in a position to start building new nuclear reactors again, it needs to decide what will happen to EDF. There's some pretty ambitious reforms that Macron wants to do, or wanted to do, put it standby, quite likely to do in the coming months. And once that is done, I guess we can start discussing on what's the plan to build new reactors and how we finance them, who is in charge. But as you mentioned before, the issue is more on the short term. What do we do with the current fleet? How do we fix the issues?
Exactly. Well, I'd like to return to that a bit later, Emeric. But if we can focus, on the reforms of EDF. What's on the table to those listeners who haven't been closely following developments in France? What are the options, or what has Macron kind of said that he'd like to do with the utility?
There's a lot of different options when you look at details, but generally speaking, what seems to be the only realistic option is to split nuclear generation. And whether it will be 100% nationalized or not, that remains a question. But it's quite likely that we see, a split between the different activities of EDF, renewable on the one hand, the nuclear on the other hand, with the nuclear quite likely to be, in my opinion, fully nationalized and quite regulated in the way it's sold to the market. On the way the nuclear generation is sold to the market. I mean, this is linked to the ARENH that comes to an end in 2025, and something has to be done to find a new mechanism.
Absolutely. So there's a kind of bad bank option. Is this what we're talking about here, Emeric, or would that be unfair?
I think it's quite unfair because nuclear is not bad in itself. But it needs, looking at what is now, with a huge amount of money that needs to be invested to A, fix the issue, B, expand the lifespan of the different units, can be seen as a bad bank for the next few years. But generally speaking, nuclear generation should be a profitable business.
I'm just wondering as well, Emeric. I mean, whenever there are changes to EDF structure or plants are planned to close, there's often a very strong union reaction. So how do you see this panning out in the years to come? That will the unions react to sort of any changes in the structure of EDF or how it operates as a company?
Yes, they will definitely react, and we're quite likely to see some strikes here and there, quite regularly actually. Now, I don't think all the unions have exactly the same view. From what I've heard recently, I'm not sure we'll see all the unions striking together and sharing the same view on what should be done. So, in my opinion, I think a structural change at EDF is doable because part of it really is common sense. Most of the unions, now it's needed. They know how much money is needed to finance the nuclear generation. So I would say I'm rather optimistic. I'm not saying that Macron will be able to run the pension reform and the EDF reform at the same time, the same week, but I think it's feasible within the course of a few months.
So got some tough battles ahead anyway. So yes. Now. We talked a little bit, or I mentioned in the intro that EDF has become, or France, a net importer of power from its neighbours. and the EDF output targets are the lowest in 30 years. Now, do you expect the company to reach this target of 295 to 315 terawatt hours?
Yes, I think so. There's a part of me that think they might be able to produce a bit more, in fact. But we're still quite blind actually about what will happen in the next few months. We know there's this stress corrosion issue on top of various other issues. And regarding this stress corrosion issue, we had the ASN, the regulator, giving a speech yesterday. We literally said they're still running studies and checks to see if the units can run safely with this corrosion. And if that's the case, I wouldn't be surprised that we have I wouldn't say high availability this winter, but maybe decent availability this winter. However, that doesn't mean the issue doesn't have to be fixed. So, but it could be that they can still run the issues and spread the works over the next several years. So I don't think we'll see a terrific increase in the nuclear generation in the next 3 to 4 years, but we might be in a position to avoid the worst this winter.
Well, fingers crossed, because I think parts of Europe are very, not just France, but its neighbours are also very dependent on French nuclear power. Okay, yeah, but you think that we'll keep at this kind of around 300 terawatt hours for the coming years, then?
Probably a bit more, maybe somewhere between 330 and 340, 350. In the next few years, which is quite low when you look at it. We used to be above 400 terawatt hour in what we can call the old days now.
The good old days, exactly.
Yeah.
But when Emeric, recently, I think it was earlier this month or certainly at the end of last month, EDF was fined for breaches of insider information. Are you happy with the way the company puts out information on its REMIT website, which is the REMIT, the information on outages, etc.? Because, as you were saying, we're a bit blind sometimes. We don't really know exactly what the issues are, especially with the corrosion or other issues.
Yeah, well, it's a tricky question, and I'm not the regulator, but I would say they're doing a good job in publishing outages in real time when they happen. Where it's a bit more difficult for market participants is to get information about the different talks that happen between them, the ASN, I guess the government too, where it's not actual firm information that they have to publish, but it's more assumptions that they're discussing. And you really feel that there's a lot going on in the back that doesn't get communicated to the market. And also, let's be honest, you guys at Montel have very good sources sometimes from unions, especially. And yes, it's always surprising to see a listed company, to get some information from a listed company by unions rather than by the corporate communication department.
Absolutely. I think that's our reporters done a great job there, putting out that kind of information on what is the issue. But what do you make of these corrosion issues? Is it serious, or do we just not know the implications of the corrosion at the plants?
It definitely is serious, and it wasn't expected at that stage, because let me remind you that the oldest units are not affected. From what we heard, it's only the most recent units that are affected. So yes, it's serious. Whether the units can run safely with this issue is still under investigation. I guess EDF will say yes. The regulator will look into it and will give his decision, will give his view on that. But in any case, fixing the issues is quite a heavy job because it's in the nuclear part of the units. So you can't get workers to spend 12 hours fixing the pipes there. So it's not something you can fix in a few days or weeks or even months. So I think it requires a very, very large scale plan from EDF.
And fixing it and dealing with it also then will require the plants to be offline while that's done as well.
Yes.
So hopefully they'll schedule it at a time, not maybe in the coldest days in the winter, but I'm sure they know that, don't they?
Yeah, they're very good at doing that. I have no concerns there. But what we're seeing these days is that the power prices are very high even in the summer. So there's really two things: the security of supply aspect, which they will deal with. But in any case, not having the units running in the summer is also very costly for the country and for the continent.
For sure. I mean, that's we're very dependent on that, as we mentioned earlier. But you mentioned, you expected to see a big expansion in solar. What about wind in France? What are the plans here? I mean, it must have very good offshore conditions on the north coast and on the Atlantic coast.
Yes, there are plans. From what I'm seeing, they're a little bit less ambitious than for the solar. I guess the reason is that it's more difficult to get the permit and to get the public acceptance for offshore wind farms than it is for solar.
And is Macron hoping to deal with this? I mean, it's the same old not in my backyard kind of protest, the NIMBYism. Is there a way? I know that they've had similar problems in Italy, for example, and they're looking to speed that up. Is that on the agenda of the new Macron presidency?
I've more heard that for solar than for wind, to be perfectly honest with you. But I might not. I've heard everything. Might not be aware of everything. But I think there's a strong willingness to push for that for solar. For wind, I think a little bit less.
If we could move on to, the energy crisis in Europe and what how France has dealt with it. What has been the major impact of the crisis in France? I mean, we can see obviously the massive increase in prices and the moves to cap some of the retail prices. But what are the other moves? How is France dealing with it?
It's a good question. So first, let's be clear. There's two crises that are actually somehow linked. There's a gas crisis, with prices going absolutely mental there, linked to a nuclear crisis. Before last spring, I'd say it was only a gas crisis, where we saw gas prices going up. Then we started having the nuclear issues, which is adding to the gas crisis, because the less nuclear generation you have available, the more gas you need to replace it. I'm talking not only from a French point of view, but from a European point of view. So far, the way France has been dealing with it, from the retail point of view, you mentioned it, there's been some cap implemented on the prices. From a wholesale point of view, well, we just replaced the nuclear that was missing by some gas coming either from French gas units or from surrounding countries, importing significant amount of power from Spain, from Germany, from the UK. And but again, it's not specific to France. From a European point of view, we just imported a lot of LNG from the US to try and refill the storages. And so far, the plan has been going okay, I'd say. Also because the imports from Russia have not really been cut. So far, we're in a position to refill the storages and think we might be okay by the end of the summer. Long story short, we from a pure power point of view, there isn't a lot that has been done. By that I mean we haven't seen any major demand response or sobriety initiatives, which is quite surprising. There's been a little bit of demand destruction, very marginal in my point of view. From the analysis we're running with my company, we're seeing, I'd say, almost zero. I know some companies are seeing a few percent. It's very difficult to calculate exactly how much it is because there's a strong weather impact. But so far, from a consumer point of view, because there's been some cap on the prices, both for residential customers, but also for professional customers. It's not directly a cap, but with the RN, the extra volume of RN, they've been quite protected from high prices. So it's been more or less business as usual. I think it can be very different next winter.
Yeah, that's the scary part. But so that's interesting. You haven't seen industry or industrial demand fall at all in France as a result of the energy crisis.
I haven't seen anything very significant. I haven't seen anything very significant. I think at the European point of view, the gas demand is down by around 6%, which is quite a lot, or significant. The power demand is down maybe 1%, 1 to 2% from what we're seeing at the moment. It'll be in a few weeks, when there's no heating demand left at all in Europe, we'll have a much clearer view.
Perfect. I'd just like to finish, really, Emeric, by talking about the ARENH mechanism. I mean, for those listeners who are unaware what this is a number of years back, the European Commission forced EDF to sell a proportion of its power to industrials at a fixed price. How do you see this? You said this is going to end in 2025. The debate's becoming quite fierce, and what should replace it, or should we continue with it? What's the current state of play here, Emeric?
The first unknown is the volume for 2023, because you know the ARENH volume was 100 terawatt hour. It went up to 120 terawatt hour for 2022. We don't know what is going to happen for 2023. Now, for the future of the mechanism, there's a very strong consensus, I'd say, for improving the mechanism, improving it in two ways. A, rising the price, I think it's important, and B, making it less optional for the buyers. Because the issue with this mechanism at the moment is that the retailers, they have the choice to buy ARENH or not. So when the market is under the ARENH price, retailers just don't buy, which is plus there's a lot of other bits of optionality in the mechanism. I think it would be fair to have a mechanism that is a kind of guarantee for EDF of revenue over 5 to 10 years. And that is linked to the market price.
So a long-term contract, if you like.
Be it long-term contract for difference. Yeah, I think there's a lot of options there. But clearly, most of the consumers or the retailers, the industrials, I think, would be happy with such a mechanism.
So what's EDF's view here? What do they think? I know you're not a representative of EDF, but what does they? Clearly not. But what do they? How do they view this mechanism and changes to it?
I mean, first, EDF is not one person, so there's a lot of different views there.
For sure.
But I'd say the CEO is not completely against it. In fact, I think he realizes that it's a mechanism that makes sense for the consumer, and that ultimately the money saved compared to market price goes into the consumer's pocket. Unlike what a lot of people say, which is completely wrong, the money doesn't go to the retailers there. They don't make money by buying ARENH at 42 and selling it on the market at 200 euros per megawatt hour. It doesn't work like that. So I think it's a mechanism that isn't quite right at the moment in the way it's designed. There's too much optionality for the buyers. The price can always be discussed, but it's quite likely to continue post 2025 with some adjustments.
Emeric, perfect. We look forward to discussing, more deeply when we have a better idea of the new government in terms of energy minister and the new CEO of EDF, etc. So maybe sometime later in the year. But for now, thank you very much for a fantastic overview of what's happening in France. Thank you, Emeric.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Literally minutes after we recorded this episode, EDF lowered its production targets for this year by 5% to 280 to 300 terawatt hours, citing corrosion checks on a dozen reactors, which could impact production until 2024. A 280 terawatt hour output would be the lowest for 34 years and well below last year's level of 360.7. The firm maintained its 300 to 330 terawatt estimate for next year, but it warned that considering the overall control and repair program, nuclear generation for 2044 may be impacted. So that's just to give you some background, the things that happened very quickly in this sector.